Hi,
Welcome,
I'm Benjamin
everybody.
Studebaker.
Oh, 1 second, Benjamin. We've got the little buffering thing, but people can definitely see us and hear us on the live side now. What's up, folks?
Okay. Hey,
But,
guys.
before I oh, there we go. We're recording. Before we actually do the official beginning of the recording though, I'm gonna say hey to Ian Cochrane. Good to see you, man. Great to have someone tuning in from Wales. Dustin said, I'm waiting for option 3 for why I haven't hit the like button. Oh, man. We know what option 3 is. It involves something like jumping off of a bridge or I don't know. What was the last one you had, Benjamin? It was
Maybe I'd rather have a midair collision with a helicopter.
yeah. Yeah, we'll do that one right now. We've got Kerem here. That's great to see you, man. Great to see you. I'm going to announce something before we get this episode going. I'm suspecting Benjamin already knows what it is, but let's go ahead and create this poll. Have you smashed? And I'm going to put in parentheses what a midair. I'd rather be in a
Yeah,
midair.
collision with a helicopter. Can you fit all that?
I could say collision. I can't say
Yeah, I'd rather
helicopter.
collide with a helicopter. Maybe collide with a chopper. That might work. I'd rather collide with a chopper.
There we go. There we go. We got it.
All right.
All right, and then let's hit record.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
This is David McKerracher. You're listening to Why Left.
So today on Why Left, we're going to talk about some of the things that have been going on in the opening weeks of the Trump administration. What matters? What doesn't matter? What has Dave been hearing people talking about? Because I've been in Germany, so what I've been hearing is probably different from what Dave's been hearing.
Yeah, actually, so you've been away pretty much the whole time, right? You were gone before Inauguration Day. You've been over there the whole time. Uh, your what has your media diet looked like? You're not receiving the week? You're not watching what you're normally watching, or are you, as far as online consumption goes, pretty much still following a lot of the day-to-day news?
Yeah, the stuff that comes in online, I'm still getting. What I am not getting is the week and day-to-day conversations with people in Indiana. What I'm getting instead is conversations with people who live in allied states,
And
generally university people.
what's the mood? What's the general where's the discourse at in Germany?
Well, I think there is incredible frustration directed at Trump over some of the tariffing of the allied states. There is frustration regarding Elon Musk and his interventions into German and British politics, the op-ed papers, the support for the AfD. I have had multiple people tell me that the AfD is different from the Republican Party. It's actually blood and soil nationalist as opposed to the Republican Party, which they're willing to believe might be something different. And the argument is that while the Republican Party might be something different, it nonetheless emboldens the AfD. And because the AfD is, in their view, authentically blood and soil nationalist, at minimum, and perhaps more, this is for them the chief problem with Trump, the effect that he has on the European right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say that the AfD is like a really far right or hard right party. But I never hear more about it than that. Is the AfD saying well, like what is it? What's the main thing that they're advocating for that's getting them called far right?
So the AfD was founded as a Eurosceptic party. In the course of being a Eurosceptic party, it has also taken on a variety of right-coded positions on social issues, on immigration, And then there's also the hairy question of Germany's special history or special past, where the AfD has tended to take the view that Germans should not be feeling bad about their past. And they've been kind of keen to make space for certain sentiments that are not usually permitted to enter German public discourse. The German state regulates the culture a little bit more, maybe a lot a bit more than the British or particularly the American state does. There is, there are certain things that you are not legally allowed to say in Germany. There are certain positions you are not legally allowed to take. And if a political party is accused of taking these positions, then it will be potentially outlawed on the basis of being an anti-system extremist party. So there's also a perception that the AfD is careful to avoid receiving this status and therefore is probably further right even than it lets on.
Right. So they can't say the Holocaust never happened or it wasn't as big a deal or actually it was justified if they want to, because that's actually illegal.
Right. That's actually illegal. So even if they want to say something like that, they cannot.
I see. So there's a good reason a lot of people are genuinely concerned with Elon Musk's current involvement, or whatever we want to call it, with however he's supporting the AfD, and I'm assuming he's just giving them lots of money or something like that.
He wrote in one of the, I think it was in one of the major German dailies, a piece making the case for the AfD in the upcoming German election, which will happen a couple of days after I go. I think it's February 23rd. Yeah, the AfD, I think it was earlier this year or maybe late last year, did quite well in some regional elections in East Germany. It typically performs much better in East Germany than it does in West Germany, in large part because East Germany has only been a democracy for a relatively short period of time. And it's not as if this is something that East Germany necessarily chose. It was kind of forced on East Germany by circumstance. And while many people in East Germany were glad to get out from under the GDR, they aren't necessarily happy with the system in West Germany. There are things about the system in West Germany that aren't necessarily attractive to them. And then on top of this, you also have the developmental gap. East Germany has not developed nearly as much as West Germany, and the regional gap has never properly closed. So there's a feeling of continuous neglect in East Germany, similar to how, say, Southern Italy feels about Northern Italy, or Northern England feels about Southern England, or rural France feels about Paris. There are a lot of these major regional inequalities within European states that can produce support for other kinds of politics. There's also a new anti-woke left party in Germany, the BSW, which is trying to compete for votes with the AfD in East Germany.
So this is related directly to what's going on in the United States, I think, especially with what everybody's saying, because when people are talking about Donald Trump as a kind of fascist or something to be very concerned about, one of the big things that people will point at is his collaboration with with Musk. And then a lot of people are going back to the Sig Heil, or as I've been referring to it, the notorious gesture. But as far as like the other kinds of things that people are saying, I'll give you a quick little rundown. I'd say a lot of people who are not concerned, not really, have become concerned. A couple of those people being why left enjoyers are over here asking me, well, Dave, when are you going to be talking to Benjamin again? Because I can't wait to hear what he has to say, because he certainly didn't seem extraordinarily concerned when Trump won in the first place, right? And so we did our message to Democrats. And we were thinking about doing a sort of follow-up message to Democrats. So if we were before saying, all right, guys, if this is why you're worried, well, there's a lot of other things to be worried about. Like, for instance, the fact that no matter who wins, we're going to be at this back and forth at the end of history, and there's no possibility for large-scale structural change. All of the big things that come through that Trump is able to do can be walked back 4 years later. Anything good that he does can be walked back later. Anything bad that he does will probably be walked back later. But also, the two parties are often complicit in sharing certain interests. And so some of the things that Democrats protest, they actually won't revoke later when they have the chance because they secretly actually don't care. It's just a public stance. And so, like, there's this sort of, I mean, and maybe you could add to that, but like, I'm just doing this broad stroke sort of summary of a kind of place that we were coming at this from with the message to Democrats. Well, it's like the Democrats in our lives, they want to follow up, and they have legitimate reasons to be concerned. Of course they do. Now, what are those reasons? The ones that are the biggest on my radar, I think probably ICE rounding people up and making pretty big displays of it. Nance had federales in his neighborhood like last week, right? And he said, oh, there's all this hype online. There's always all this hype online. But then, like, when you actually see them in your neighborhood, it feels kind of different, right? It doesn't just feel like it's some online thing. It's like, no, they're coming in your neighborhood. They're messing with your neighbors. So people have concerns with that. I don't know how I should feel about ICE at this point for various reasons we can always get into later. But I would still say that that's a cause for genuine or legitimate concern. Of course, that makes that makes lots of sense why people would be concerned with that. What are other things that are going on? It's all these executive orders, right? It's not just, oh, we can't castrate children, we need to stop transing the kids. It's also, oh, trans people in the military are liars. They can't be trusted. They have bad character. Get them out. Like, there's some of the language being so harsh, so scapegoaty. It makes it harder to believe that the Republicans are, in fact, the more 1990s style, tolerant, liberal party. You know, and then with that, I'll just say the rest of it's that a lot of Project 2025 was being pushed through with those executive orders. And there's seemingly new orders every day, as well as stuff that has been on the whitehouse.gov site for a long time being taken down, including stuff related to reproductive rights, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's almost like a lot of these pages are just being ghosted, memory hold, disappeared. And so, yeah, people are saying, well, I'm not getting this from MSNBC. I'm not getting this from, like, I'm like in one person's case, she said, I haven't been following the news. I've just been watching the website. I've just been watching whitehouse.gov and actually reading the executive orders. I'm not getting this through media slanting it, right? And so to all of you, this is supposed to be like the more level-headed message to Democrats. The less level-headed one was when I did it like a week ago, where I was kind of ranting about, like, look, if things are bad, they're not going to get any better from freaking out and deleting everything and trying to hide under a rock because you think that they're going to come get you. And I was trying to say, courage, you know, go out into the unknown, take on risks and challenges, and don't give in to fear. They're trying to terrify us. Like, and I don't mean the Republicans are trying to terrify everyone who's not a Republican. I mean, the media is doing what the media does best. But that's kind of the summary of what I've seen around me, what I've heard, and what I've actually said so far in my response to it all last week. What do you think about this all, Benjamin? What would you say to the Democrats in our lives?
Well, one of the things that J.D. Vance said when he was asked, how are you going to deport the very large number of people who live in the country? It's illegally. It's something like, tens of millions of people. And he said, well, let's start with 1 million. to start with 1 million, to do that over Trump's term, you would achieve a deportation rate that would be roughly equivalent to the deportation rate in Obama's first term. Those numbers are often cut off of the charts that they show of deportation rates under recent presidents. Often they don't bother to show the first term of the Obama administration. They'll kick it in around 2013. But the very, very highest deportation rates that we've had were in that first term of the Obama administration. It remains to be seen if Donald Trump can actually achieve a deportation rate that matches that. In the whole first term, when we were having that whole debate about ICE, the deportation rate was actually lower by roughly half. It was roughly half the rate it was in terms of number of people deported. And then when you consider that the number of undocumented people is larger in total than it was then, as a percentage of the total or as a rate of deportation, it's even lower relative to the size of the number of people in the country. So it would take a lot for Donald Trump to match that figure. And I'm not yet convinced that that is something that will actually be achieved, because Donald Trump tried in the first term to raise the number of deportations. And that was something he really struggled to do very noticeably. With regard to the executive orders, one of the things that the Trump administration has done very effectively this time is to put the executive orders in your face and to make you watch him sign them and to make it so that you can easily read the language that's in the orders. How many people out there went and did this with the Biden orders, or the Trump orders from the first term, or the Obama orders? Because in each of these presidencies, there was a significant number of executive orders. The language in many of these orders has always been kind of absurd, ridiculous. One of the Biden orders that I featured in my book about equity was incredibly shoddily written and totally confusing and just an absolute mess. The people who put it together were completely incompetent in the way that they wrote the order. This is true of a lot of executive orders, in part because they are not actual laws. They are not really properly drafted in many cases. They often contain all kinds of mistakes, legal mistakes, regardless of who the president is, which party. So these executive orders end up going to court, and a lot of them don't make it through. Remember when we were told over and over again that Biden was going to do the student debt relief because he kept ordering it? And then each time it got blocked, he changed it a little bit and then ordered it again. And we were told to believe that eventually it would happen and that this was in good faith. Oftentimes with an order, you can signal to a part of your base a commitment to do something that you aren't actually going to be able to do. And you might know that you're not going to be able to do that thing. But if you can create confusion about whether the order is legal, you can create a perception of moving and acting in an area where you know on some level, ultimately, you're not going to be able to move and act.
Right.
So that's often the function of these orders. The other thing is that many of these orders are old orders. They are orders from the first term that Biden, at the beginning of his term, tore up and destroyed, that are being brought back, that people have simply forgot about, memory hold, didn't even know about the first time. There's a lot of that too. And then, on top of that, you've got the enormous number of Biden orders that he has to revoke. So there's going through old Biden orders and discontinuing them. And then there are orders which are meant to make various interventions vis-a-vis the orders that Biden made that did hold up. The reason that there's all this executive order talk is that the president has extremely small congressional majorities of, I think, 3 seats in the House and a handful of seats in the Senate. Many of the senators are publicly speaking out, Republican senators, against various things that are happening. Rand Paul, in particular, has been quite vocal. But even the Senate Majority Leader has expressed a willingness to potentially push against the president if he takes the tariffs and trade war too far. He has given no indication that he currently feels what the president is doing is excessive or that he's going to make any kind of imminent move. But he has publicly reaffirmed his capacity and willingness to potentially make a move. Now, all of this is is not really getting talked about. People are just focusing on what is the language that's in the orders, and they're focusing on the scenes, the visual images of him signing the orders, and the conversations that go on between him and the aides as the orders are signed. Now, the thing that was most concerning to me is the new set of tariffs that have come out, which were initially extremely sizable. There was a 25% tariff on all Mexican imports, a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, and then a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports over and above the existing tariffs. Those tariffs were brought in initially by Trump and then reduced a little bit during the COVID pandemic. But then what remained of them, they were retained by Biden. And then Biden expanded those tariffs on China. So the Chinese tariffs are a bipartisan project that both the Democrats and the Republicans have been involved in, expanding and deepening over time. Trump did change the strategy. Originally, in the Obama administration, the strategy was going to be a trans-Pacific partnership, a free trade agreement with potential new allied states in the Pacific. So the goal would be to lower trade barriers with countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, India, and to then develop those states and to encourage business to leave China, or instead of coming to China, come to India, come to Vietnam, come to the Philippines. That agreement was torn up by Trump because he felt it was a bad deal for American workers. He felt it would be more effective to tariff Chinese imports, and then business could move to the Pacific allied states, or it could move to the United States. As it happened, there was a little bit of both, but certain allied states did do quite well. Vietnam in particular did very well out of that regime and would have done perhaps even better with the TPP, but did quite well even with the tariffs. So that change in policy to pursue it through tariffs was kept by Biden. Biden did not attempt to revive the TPP. And now Trump is significantly expanding the tariff regime. A 10% across the board tariff is much more significant. And the reason it's very significant is that it's not targeting specific industries. Many of the original Trump tariffs focused on things like steel, or they focused on things like tied in some way, shape, or form to defense. In the case of Biden, there was the tariff targeting chips. A lot of these tariffs are industry focused. This is an across the board tariff. Now, in the case of Mexico and Canada, there was a very quick move by both the Mexican and Canadian Trump to have a phone call and discuss with Trump what could be done to delay the tariffs. And those phone calls were able to persuade Trump to delay the tariffs while negotiations go on. Now, public statements were released by the Mexican and Canadian governments, and people are treating these public statements as if they are the agreement. No, these are the Mexican and Canadian governments reaffirming their prior commitments as part of an opening of negotiations, which will go on over the course of the next month or so. Right. And hopefully, in both of these cases, there will be some kind of agreement reached that prevents the tariffs from coming in. And so the very serious crisis that Canada in particular faced over this will hopefully be averted. But the Chinese tariffs have come into force. The 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports to the United States, all of them, are actually happening. They are live and they're going through. That to me is the most significant thing that's occurred. But I'm not convinced that this is something that only Donald Trump would have been interested in doing. I think that when we're talking about the situation with China, it's a question of pace. Both the Republicans and Democrats are interested in economic decoupling with China. But there are some differences in terms of how it's to be done. The Democrats generally prefer carrots for potential allied states, and the Republicans generally prefer sticks with regard to China. But in recent years, the Democrats have also been willing to use sticks with regard to China, and the debate has instead been about how big a stick and how quick to use the stick. So this is something that is pivotal. I don't think it's necessarily going to result in a rapid collapse of trade between the United States and China, but it will accelerate the decoupling. And it will accelerate it not so much in terms of imports from China being reduced, But when the United States looks to buy more goods and services from around the world, it's much less likely that that new trade will occur with China. And it's more likely that we'll see that trade occurring with other states. So that as the US economy continues to grow, the percentage of the trade that is with China will decrease, even if in nominal terms, it doesn't shrink by very much. Because of the growth of the United States and the global economy and the Chinese economy, it will become a less significant factor over time. And that's something that has already happened to a degree, but slowly. This 10% tariff is a move to speed it up. The big question for other states around the world is who's going to benefit from the United States really aggressively looking to trade with other countries instead of China. And there are a few possibilities. One would be reshoring. Another would be increased trade with the Pacific allies or potential new Pacific allies. And then the third option would be to try to do more trade with the Latin American states so as to reduce their temptation to interact with China. And we'll see exactly how it shakes out. It isn't just going to be one of those three things. It will be a mix of them. But this, to me, is the significant thing. This is an escalation of the burgeoning containment. And I wrote a piece for the New Republic back in 2019 when the first round of tariffs came out about this is a harbinger of a containment strategy. And we have to think about, do we want to go down this path? Because this is the path to containment. You gradually create a condition in which the trade between the United States and China is much less important. And then that permits a much more aggressive posture because it becomes much less disruptive to have an aggressive posture. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. It probably isn't going to happen within this administration. This is something that will be a major factor in maybe 10 years. Because maybe 10 years from now, the trade volume will be reduced enough that it becomes possible to have a much harsher kind of standoff in the Pacific than we currently are able to have because of the trade volume and the disruption that it would cause. That's to me what's most interesting and potentially dangerous in this. There's a long-term kind of World War III would be putting it a bit strongly, but major confrontation between the United States and China in the Pacific, perhaps in relation to Taiwan, perhaps in relation to the South China Sea or to some of the island chains down there or the Straits of Malaga. This is where the real existential risk is in geopolitics, but it's not something where the Democrats would have necessarily a very contrary policy. The Democrats would simply pursue this more slowly over a longer period of time.
Right. And on that note, I have a clip that you made me think of here of Hillary Clinton, actually. Do you recognize this one? You might remember it.
I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'm interested to see this, actually.
I kind of hope you haven't seen it because that would be really fun. This is actually something that made the rounds a little while ago, folks. And when I say made the rounds, I don't know actually how much any of you might have seen it at the time. Really quick, let me just change one thing here on the back scenes, on the scene side. But basically, this is a clip where Hillary is going off about China. And I remember when I initially saw this thinking, oh, wow. So like Democrats want to go to war. That's what I thought. I was like, oh, Democrats want to go to war with China. Like, that's what it sounds like. But also she's using some like overtly Marxist language. And that's kind of fun. So let's let's roll it.
You know, there is such a continuing anxiety about upsetting the Chinese. And there are two big reasons for that. One, Henry Kissinger mentioned maybe some unintended consequence of war down the road somewhere, but also the economic issue. And here, it's time we recognize that we need to rebuild our own supply chains, even if that requires a certain level of subsidized industrial productivity. We cannot be dependent on the Chinese market. It's not only bad for our economies, it is bad for our geopolitical strategic interests. Look at what happened with the lack of personal protective equipment or certain pharmaceutical ingredients when the pandemic hit. We were at the mercy of China. Well, we cannot let that continue, and we need to work together across the Atlantic to figure out how we're going to take back production. Now, will it be as low cost? Of course not. And how do we set our tax systems and other arrangements so that there are incentives for our businesses to return to Western democracies to produce things? And I would add that more and more businesses are seeing that unless they are low-cost producers of retail clothing, which, probably will never come back for all the obvious reasons, but if they are producing anything more sophisticated, increasingly the Chinese government, through coercion, through unfair regulation, through enforced partnerships or royalty agreements, is slowly stealing that intellectual property anyway. So I do think that we've got to get smarter about how we deal with the economic threat. And for people who say, oh, well, that disrupts the market. China has disrupted the market. China is not a free market economy. We tried. We let them into the World Trade Organization. We sent our businesses over there. We made trade deals. They are a controlled top-down economy. You will never compete and win against them unless you take back the means of production. There is such a...
Unless you take back the means of production. And so, yeah, this is something that she did. She said, I think back in 2021, or at least this tweet of a person sharing it was back in 2021. And it says that this is when she was speaking at Chatham House events.
That's a good find, Dave. I'd never seen that clip. That's a great find. Well done.
Thank you.
It is totally a bipartisan position. Now, in the rhetoric, they always emphasize heavily the reshoring. And I think there will be reshoring on security-related, defense-related industries, stuff that is actually relevant to the geopolitical strategic interest. But most other stuff, it is going to make more sense to them to deflect it to a friendly state with lower labor costs and use that to build alliances with other states around the world. So their goal is going to be to direct as much as possible to these other states. The interesting question for me is it going to be more about Latin American development or more about Asian Pacific development? Because one of the things that you will hear people talk about is, hey, some of the Latin American states are trading more with China. One way that you can potentially try to counter that if you're the United States is instead of reshoring all of these jobs, only reshore the strategically necessary jobs and deflect some of the other ones to Latin America.
Right. And, especially if we're going to go in and take over Mexico, it makes sense. Why not? Why not do that? That seems to be one of these things that some of the Democrats in my life think is actually going to happen. And I haven't looked into it at all. I don't know if you've heard about it, but apparently Mexico is sending its troops to the border. There's a bunch of saber rattling along the border, and I have no idea what it's all about. I haven't looked into it, but apparently
Mexico is trying to demonstrate its willingness to control the border because Mexico is engaged in trade negotiations with Donald Trump. So Mexico will be trying to be more muscular in its approach to its borders, and not just the southern border. But one of the major issues for the Trump administration is that there's been a lot of human trafficking of people from South America and Latin America through Mexico. So there's also going to be concern about Mexico's southern border, the border with Guatemala and Belize, and then also the Yucatan border with the Caribbean states. These are ways, these borders permit a significant amount of inflow. So oftentimes you'll be in a situation where Mexico will be cooperating on the southern border to some degree, but its own southern border will still be quite porous. And this will then permit people from other countries to come in through Mexico. The United States has liked its migrant relationship with Mexico better than it has tended to like the migrant groups that have come in from outside of Mexico in other parts of Latin and South America. If you notice, a lot of the right's rhetoric will be focused around these other Latin American and South American countries rather than Mexico, where they think that there is a bigger issue.
So it sounds like, from your standpoint, the most concerning thing has to do with the tariffs, has to go with the global trade agreements, has to do with the potential for wars, but more importantly, you're thinking about development, uneven development, which areas might be able to benefit from this thing that was going to happen probably anyway, right? So it's more of just like the U.S. has had this interesting relationship with China developing, especially over the last 20 years. So, and it's not about Trump. It's just about the two parties and whatever it is that the U.S. is going to do. This is not so much a Trump thing.
And this is also what people who are serious about money are going to care about, because if you have money to invest, if you can predict which states are going to be the beneficiaries of this process, there's an enormous amount of money to be made.
Ah, right. Speculating.
Yeah, and trying to support the growth of production in the states that are ultimately going to receive that. So having some knowledge about which states might be the interesting players would also just be good financial advice if you're somebody who plays that game in that arena.
And folks, to get our real opinion about which states are going to be the beneficiaries of these trade agreements, you have to become subscribers at theoryunderground.com. Platinum and up are the only tiers that get to hear our financial opinions. Yeah, we have a investing group that meets once a week. No, I'm just kidding. We don't.
No, it doesn't go quite that far.
Yeah.
No. But these are things to pay attention to. And yeah, when we're talking about where the world is going,
right,
and what kinds of possibilities and opportunities there will be for anybody looking to make any kind of positive change, this is the kind of stuff that you've got to pay attention to. Because the reason that I really care about tariffs and I really care about the trade issue is that the key feature of neoliberalism that makes it what it is, that causes it to have the sort of logic that it tends to have, is this enormous amount of capital mobility. So when you start making it harder for capital to exist in certain parts of the world or to move to certain parts of the world, this begins to actually change the way neoliberalism works. I'm not necessarily of the view that it gets rid of neoliberalism, because you can have, say, neoliberalism without China. You could still have a very integrated global economy that just increasingly excludes China over time.
right.
But regardless of which way you would frame it, this is meaningful change to the economic system, which will also produce change in political relationships and in what you can do, in where production is located, in where you're able to organize and struggle. And right now, a lot of people on the left are not looking at the opportunities that this process potentially creates. They are focusing on kind of taking the side of, say, China or other states. They are angry at Trump and at the United States. And so they're kind of normatively negating this move. They're going, this is bad, we don't like this. But there's no organized capacity to stop this, because both the Democrats and the Republicans are committed to a gradual process of decoupling. So getting normatively bent out of shape about it and going, this is imperialism, this is bad, I don't like it, that's not going to do anything. The question is, this is the kind of world that we're going to live in. We're going to live in a world where this process of decoupling takes place. And what does that world permit? What does it not permit? And those are hard questions that require really thinking about, what can happen, as opposed to just how should a right-thinking, morally upright person feel about it?
Right.
And too much of the conversation is focused around that right now.
Yeah, a lot of it is what what should we condemn? Uh, what should we
As if our
condemn?
condemnations matter to these people.
Yeah,
They don't care. Why should they care? What are you going to do with that feeling? If you don't have a plan to do something with the feeling, it's just talk to them.
yeah. Bringing it back to China, I don't know um, how far this goes. It's been like a sort of research question for me that has sat on the back burner for a long time. But it's like we have been at war with China, uh, in this sort of proxy war thing in Africa over resources for a long time. And I think it was something like 5 years ago. It actually became public information that there were secret bases, secret US military bases all across Africa, and that those have been actively engaged in supporting, these kind of like child army, these warlords with their child armies, like when we think of Coney 2012, right? The US has been actively doing that kind of stuff, um, pitting this warlord against that warlord backed by China, right? And that this is all about the rare earth uh, materials for our phones. I don't know. I haven't read any books about it. I haven't really tried to get to the bottom of it just yet. But apparently, this is somewhat new information. It's stuff that, if you know people in the military and they've been on certain kinds of missions that they're not allowed to talk about, yet they can still kind of talk vaguely about some of the kinds of stuff that they are off there doing, then you might already know little bits and pieces, or you might have some kind of an idea of the kinds of stuff that they're doing. But I mean, that's pretty much just about as much as I have. It starts out very vague. Um, I don't know how much you've looked into any of the proxy war in Africa stuff.
The African states were continuously objects of struggle during the Cold War, as were many, many of the developing so-called third world states. Indeed, the United States and China fought each other in Korea over the status of South Korea, which at the time that it was being fought over was a very underdeveloped country relative to what it is today. This is something that goes on when you create a kind of Cold War containment system, and it's something that we're going to probably see more of. Though how much of it will be public and how much of it will get media attention really remains to be seen. African states generally don't get a lot of Western press, regardless of what's going on in them, even when there are quite severe, multi-decade-long civil conflicts, which the United States has various levels of involvement in Africa. There is almost no press that goes to them. I'm talking about, for instance, the Congolese Civil War, the conflict in Sudan, the conflict in Ethiopia. These are things that go on and on for years. All kinds of military coups in different African states. These things happen, around the world, and people don't pay a lot of attention to them generally. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, you should care. You should pay more attention," and that's something that one could normatively say, but it
Sure.
doesn't really work. In practice, we have not been able to get American citizens to care about what goes on in Africa in such a way that they can be politically mobilized on the basis of that. So certainly there will be wrangling in Africa, but the unfortunate reality is that Africa remains too poor at this particular juncture to be an immediate high-level priority, which is why you will see this kind of pinky finger wrangling, using small numbers of troops, special forces operations, things that are not public knowledge, things that are classified that we only learn about much later on to try to make subtle moves. Also, some of the former colonial master states are still involved in Africa and still also participate in this wrangling. You might remember the involvement of France in Mali during the 10s, when after the Libyan government collapsed, a significant number of the mercenaries and troops that were brought into Libya in the Libyan civil war spilled into Mali. And then the French were trying to arm the regime in Mali against these mercenaries and rebels that had appeared in the north of Mali. And then after many, many years of this, the government in Mali said, France isn't giving us enough of what we need, and kicked the French out and tried to bring in the Wagner group, the Russian mercenaries and so on to do this. There's all kinds of things like this that go on all the time. This is not to say that any of them are unimportant. If you are caught up in any of these things in Africa, it is a terrible thing to be caught up in. But when people are acting as if the world is changing because this kind of wrangling is going on in Africa, bear in mind, if you grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it was going on. You just didn't know about it or care.
Yeah. Yeah. A Democrat in my life said a few months ago that, he liked punk in the 80s and the 90s, but he didn't like American punk. He only liked British punk because he didn't really understand the American punk because there was nothing to rebel against. And I'm over here like, I love the spirit of, underground DIY, obviously, but that's like punk's never really been my style, though it has a undeniable influence on a lot of things that I do like. But to say that there's nothing to rebel against in the United States, to me was like kind of crazy, because it's like, I know a little bit, just enough to know the United States has boots in the ground in 150 countries, and that's necessary for maintaining the current global mode of production that involves child slavery, entire countries reduced to nothing but sugar cane or coffee beans, and the children who are growing up in those countries have nothing on their horizon of possibilities unless they are the top 1%. And then what? What can they do if they're the top 1%? They can go to college, right? And so it's like the idea that there's nothing to rebel against, when this global capitalist sort of control thing has been going on the entire time we've been alive. It was going on the entire time that guy was alive, growing up in the 80s and 90s. But the fact is, I say I know a little bit. I know just enough to be able to say this. And it's like, well, most people don't. Most people don't think too deeply about this, or they hear about it and it's still just too abstract, which brings us to the concept of the zone of interest. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about with my 2 sociology classes over the last few weeks. I use this image on the podcast for my classes. The lectures get recorded and made available to them after the fact. And the podcast, like the image of it, maybe I should even show it here and now. I'll try to see if I can pull it up. But it's got, it's trying to get at the idea of what for now we're just calling the zone of interest. Did you see that movie by any chance?
I did see it. I saw it on a plane.
Sweet. Yeah, I saw it. I think I saw it in theaters. I think I saw it with Anne. And so, I'm sure it makes enough sense, but I'll say a couple things about it. So folks, this is a story about a Nazi, warden or director of a death camp during World War II. And he lives with his family on the outside of the death camp. They have a house, it's like a estate, and they have a whole staff of servants, and the children run around and play with the dogs. And the family hustle and bustle in this house is kind of the focus of the whole film. And you see this father getting ready to go to work, and then he goes off to work in the death camp, but they never name it. They never say what it is. You just, as the viewer, of course, what's going on the other side of that wall, and you see the smokestacks and whatnot. But the zone of interest, to use it as a metaphor, to use it as a sociological concept, is to take the title of the film, the main point of the film, and say, this is going on in our lives, of course, as human beings, especially as Americans. we have a zone of interest. So in that film, the zone of interest is the house and the family, and you pretty much see this side of the director. You know, he's a family man. That's kind of the point. While in the United States, most of what we see is on the shopping shelf, or it's at the, you know, it's on Amazon. We don't see what is necessary down the line of production to get those goods to you, much less as cheap as they are, right? So the idea that we're out here fighting wars for democracy and freedom is absurd when you think about how all of this is to maintain the cheapness of these products, right? I'll find that image here, but is there, I guess there is one other thing I want to say about the zone of interest, but first I want to see if there's anything that you would add to my description of the film or how it relates to all of this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, if they're not adequately acquainted with how much horrible exploitation and misery is inflicted by the capitalist system in its ordinary functioning in a time of seeming normalcy, then whenever they hear about any part of it, they have this big reaction and go, why don't people care more about this? One of the signs of maturity is to reach a point where you recognize that this is the way this system is. And this is not the exception, but the rule of it. So when we're talking about what's an exception is something which would change it, which would potentially introduce new dynamics that we might maybe see potential in or possibility in, something that could be a new development. And if instead we just focus on the negating of it, you could spend every minute of every day talking about these horrors that happen all over the world. And it doesn't do a thing to change any of it. And the stuff that you've heard about lately, odds are it's not exceptional. Odds are it is part of the normal course of things, which is why at the top of the episode, I emphasized how many people Barack Obama deported and my skepticism that Donald Trump will be able to catch up.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm skeptical too, to say the least. So folks, what I have up here on the screen now is the image that I use for the podcast. It just says social theory with David McKerracher. There's a bunch, it's almost like one of these sort of bubble maps. You see bubbles, you know, you see concepts, a concept map. You just see concepts all over the place, like PCFM, time energy, mode of production, totalization, political phenomenology, critical media theory, double consciousness, ressentiment, episteme, etc., etc., etc. Capital, labor power, value. So there's words all over it. And then there's also black and white thinkers all around it. But then there's also some colored photos, and each one of those photos is one that I'll return to with my students frequently. And this all ties into the zone of interest in a few ways. But like, I just want to describe what a few of these photos are for people who are just listening to this, say on Spotify in the future. We have the little girl who's picking coffee beans in Guatemala. We have the fathers walking through the sugarcane fields in Belize. We have the iconic military man standing in front of a tank, securing our freedom. And then we have down here at the bottom a couple of little African boys in a pit, in a mine. They're mining cobalt for your iPhone, right? But of course, I don't want to just highlight the marginalized others, Oriental others. I also wanted to do something, you know, where I have who Democrats tend to overlook, which is right here. You got the trucker, and he's hugging his kids goodbye because he's going to be driving across country for a couple months. And so the kids are crying as they say goodbye to their dad. You know, these are examples I like to hit on in my lectures. Child slavery is part of what gets bracketed out. Like it's a lot more common for people to talk about how climate change is what gets bracketed out when you're standing there in the grocery store aisle. But child slavery is also getting bracketed out when you're standing there on the grocery store aisle, right? So anyway, bringing it back around to the center. In the center here, we have a bubble, and inside the bubble is Americana suburbia, the sort of beautiful, almost kind of, I don't know, this looks kind of like a, I don't know, McCall, Idaho. You know what I mean? Like a touristy kind of town, alpine. You know, like maybe a ski resort town. You got some hot air balloons over it, but it's like this. It's like the fantasy of the suburbs, not like the lame suburbs. This is like the beautiful suburbs, but it's inside of a rose tinted bubble, right? That's inside of that bubble is the zone of interest for Americans, whether you belong to the middle class or not. The fantasy of the good life is this one that Hollywood has provided for us, of a certain kind of middle class life. And that's what's inside the bubble. And of course, a lot of my students are coming to college in the hopes of securing for themselves in their future this kind of life. And I'm not against them achieving that kind of life. I actually hope that they do. I don't think that they should have to live like Diogenes, but I do want them to think about the conditions of possibility for this fantasy. And also, if that fantasy is unrealistic, if it's a sort of perfectionist expectation that's not keeping up with the changes, the material, political, economic developments in, for instance, the housing market, the job market, etc., then yeah, I do want them to think about how, if they have this sort of middle-class Americana sort of vision for what their life is going to be like, is it realistic? So there's that. Is it realistic? And the other side of it is also, what's necessary for maintaining that lifestyle? And so, of course, we have these various metonyms for the global system of production, being the girls picking the coffee beans, the father who's leaving the kids, the Belizean farmers, the African miners, and of course, our troops, our brothers and sisters who are trying to survive in today's society, and so they've enlisted. We should just, instead, I don't like this language of our troops, because I don't feel like this. I don't feel like they're not mine, but the people in the military are our friends and are our family members. So with all that said, what's kind of mind-blowing, though, is though I talk about the mode of production and the relations of production and the horizon of possibilities, all relating to, like, you know, these sort of instances. So we can't think about our horizon of possibilities without thinking about our place in the relations of production. And we can't think about that without the global mode of production. And I always tie it back to these concrete examples. The students will still say stuff like, when I have them write up something to talk about where they see themselves in 10 years, and then the next question is like asking them to situate their career that they see themselves entering over the next 10 years. I'll say, situate yourself in the relations of production. How does your career that you're looking to do relate to the mode of production? And what they do is that, like, this is so common that it's actually kind of mind-blowing. They'll say, well, I aim to be a manager, or I aim to be a professional in this kind of a context, and so I will be consulting with these kinds of people, and I'll be having meetings with these kinds of people, and I'll be over this kind of person, and I'll be helping solve problems for this kind of person. So like they usually are thinking within the scope of the institution or organization that they seek to occupy in the near future. They're thinking about the limited field outside of the broader field. And so what I'll always say in the margins is, you're missing the child slavery part. Like, remember how we keep talking about that part? That's, you gotta expand out and think about the global mode of production. I'm not even looking for them to write a whole paragraph about it, but they do actually have to say how the position they're looking to fill relates to those other actually existing positions that are just a presupposed necessity for the maintenance of our current world order. And to me, there's nothing more American than your zone of interest reliably bracketing out these other parts of the process.
Yeah, and that's something that we have to tarry with. If we want to see change happen, we have to bear in mind that people do tend to think in this way, whether you want them to or not, whether you feel understanding or empathetic toward it or not, regardless of our attitudes. This is an important part of how we ultimately have to make change. We have to make change in a way that's consistent with the fact that people do this and think like this and behave this way. And we can say we don't want to do that, they're bad, they should get good. But this is just blaming individuals. It just becomes another kind of reaction, and it doesn't go anywhere.
And it seems like if college students who are open-minded and curious about the world are going to reliably bracket this part of the thing out, even when they are in a class to learn about it and they genuinely do care. I'm not, look, guys, I have obviously had students who don't care or they're just slacking off. I've had all kinds of students. But I mean, at least in one of my classes right now, I would say that every single one of the students is paying attention and giving good answers. Like it wasn't like that for the first week and a half to 2 weeks, but now that we're on the fourth week, we're officially there. Like I've worked really hard with all the students to make sure that they could kind of get on the wavelength, and they're not just throwing it away. And these are not just AI answers, right? So I really feel at this point confident that they really do care. But if it's so hard for them to keep in mind the part of mode of production that includes child slavery, well, then how much harder would it be to take that message to the rest of America, right? So I think part of what you're saying, Benjamin, is like, yeah, we have to tarry with this. Not we have to tarry with the fact that the global mode of production entails slavery. We have to tarry with the fact that that's a really hard message to get across to Americans. Is it actually necessary? If that's actually necessary, it feels almost like a fool's errand. Is that what you're actually saying, or am I mishearing you?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
If you actually want to make change, you got to bear in mind that a lot of the stuff that is horrible doesn't do anything to try to draw attention to it. Politically, you don't get anywhere by trying to, as we used to say back in the day, raise awareness. Raising awareness does not get the job done. And this assumption that if you just raise awareness enough, eventually, and the reason I'm saying it that way is because that's how the really, really posh students, undergraduate students in the UK would always say it. We're raising awareness.
Oh,
And yeah.
Oh, it's an accent thing. Okay, I get it now.
Yeah, we're raising awareness. That's how they'd always say it. But it never translates into anything that you can actually do. And then what happens is that the people who spend their time engaged in this kind of activism develop a bitterness because people are not listening to them. And they start making up excuses for why they don't get anywhere, which involve othering and belittling the people who are not responding to their message.
Yes. Exactly. I'll even add, like, kind of one of the implications of this to the Democrats and leftists in our lives. I know I've added leftists on there just to kind of include the entire left of center spectrum as people might imaginarily relate to it, right? Like, however you situate yourself on that spectrum, we can rage against the idea that a lot of people, if not the majority of people in the United States, don't care about the world. We can rage about it, that everyone just speaks one language and only cares about where they're shopping this week and what they're doing with their family next week and what they're doing with their friends. Like, that's it, right? We can rage against that, but what has all that rage amounted to?
Yeah.
What has it
and
actually
now let's
done?
take it up another level, right? To take it up another level, of course, there are going to be people in these university environments who are going to think that they're going to accomplish something by taking a normative stance and shoving it into the discourse repeatedly. Of course, that's going to happen. They're 18, 19, 20, 21. People are going to do that because they're not going to believe old people like me when we say that that's not going to work. They'll say, oh, you've been bought off. You must be a Fed. You've got, you're making excuses for them. You're not having the appropriate normative reaction. There must be something wrong with you. You must be a stressorite, brown shirt, something, whatever. And all of this stuff that came up back when we did What's Left back in the day, when we tried to make a normative intervention with regard to the college-educated people and to get them to message differently and better, it was the same mistake which they themselves were making with regard to the working class. We, in trying to correct the professionals, were engaged in the same behavior at a level up that the professionals were engaged in trying to correct the workers. And it's for that reason that I now just completely take a step back from this normative stuff and go, well, what's actually happening and what are people likely to do in response to it? And is there anything good or useful that could come out of that? Because to be able to influence anybody with what you say, you have to be operating close enough to what they always already want to do that you're just putting some wind in a sail that already exists. You're not going to be able to get somebody who's doing something that is fundamentally mistaken to change what they're doing at scale with language by disseminating a message on the internet. Certainly no message that's any good makes any headway that way with the way that the algorithm is structured and the way the internet presently works. So what we can do is try to study what's going on and not get so mad at everybody all the time and just see what can happen. And there are going to be people who are going to be dissatisfied with that and are going to want it to be normative. And they're going to go, how come you haven't condemned this? How come you haven't condemned that? And the answer is that's just not a useful project in my view. But if you feel drawn inextricably toward that kind of project, if that's something that you can't help but do because of who you are, your position in society, where you are in life, what will it achieve for me to say, don't do that? That's a foolish waste of time.
Right.
Odds are absolutely nothing. So I'm not looking to correct the college kids either. I'm trying to get beyond something, beyond just verbally correcting different groups of people. This is what we are encouraged to spend all our time doing because we can't conceive of any form of real political action apart from yapping. It just becomes, let's correct different groups of people. So the audience for this show is hopefully people who are interested in what's actually going on. And if you're interested in what's actually going on, now we can have a conversation because at least you guys and us, we are interested in the same thing, broadly speaking. We might have slightly different views about it. We might understand it in different ways, but we share a goal of trying to understand the situation as opposed to just react to it. And that shared goal allows us to have a common project.
That's what we want. I'm going to pull up and read to you one of these messages that I'm receiving in terms of like people who are watching a lot of the news right now and getting very upset. So what you just outlined, I think, is what we're saying is we're not trying to influence you all. Insofar as we might want to influence a few of you, it's just for the people who are trying to understand what is our approach at Theory Underground. If you're trying to get on the wavelength here and actually just, do the kinds of work that we're trying to do, you might be wondering, well, then why don't you guys denounce this and endorse that and influence people this way or that way? So we're just, by conveying what we're getting at by saying we're not giving normative advice here. That's not the point of these analyses. Yeah, there might be a little idea of like, well, influence in a very limited sense. Just say, this is how you could work with us, or this is kind of how you can situate us in this media context.
If you're interested in what we're doing, come join Theory Underground. That would be the most that we would want from you. If you're interested in what we're doing and you care about it and you want to understand, come do it with us.
Just come do it with us. Now, with that said, this thing I'm going to just point to here is the video that I did last week. So if you go to theoryunderground.com, if you go, or sorry, not .com, the YouTube. If you go to the YouTube and then you go to the live tab to see the different live streams that have happened recently, the one that's called Weird Times in the thumbnail, but the title says people are really freaking out, RN, which is internet right now, right? That in this one that I streamed 8 days ago, apparently, I thought that was just a few days ago, but time is moving too fast, apparently. In this one, I said, I dedicate this one to my friend who's messaging me very worried, very concerned right now. Benjamin, I don't think you saw this, right? You didn't see the stream?
No, I haven't seen it.
So I'll read you the message that I read aloud there. This friend has given me permission to read this aloud. And then I'll also read the follow-up. So I'm going to assume nobody has watched that stream I did. I mean, 2,000 people watched it, but I'm going to assume nobody here has seen it. And I'm going to say, don't even bother, people. Don't even bother go looking at it. It's fine. I hate when people get this sense of FOMO for a throwaway stream. But and it's not throwaway in the sense that it's worthless, but I'm just saying it's not priority. Anyway, so this friend said, "Hey Dave, the politics are becoming so dangerous right now. My non-white friends are now telling me that they are not willing to enter the country. I have foolishly spoken out in public against the right-wing Trump administration and put myself at risk. I've decided to eliminate all of my public accounts within the next few days. I have no way to defend myself against any government people or the right-wing militia. I've been a total fool to say so much in public. I'm going to delete my Substack and YouTube accounts very soon. Please remove my subscription from Theory Underground. I've been warned to get out of any public accounts. It will take me a few days, but my God, I don't want to get kidnapped and tortured. I thought this was absolute nonsense, and suddenly it's very real. I want you to be safe as well. This is now very serious, and I have been such an idiot to be so public. Phew, I'm too overwhelmed to get into my accounts and cancel them today, but I'm going to try to begin tomorrow morning. Unreal. Be safe." This person said she's definitely interested to hear your thoughts, Benjamin, because she's been following Why Left since day one. She's been following all of our conversations, and so she's super interested in if we're, I guess part of the question is like, have we been downplaying and dismissing in a sort of sense? Are we tranquilizing people and putting them to sleep at a time when things are getting a lot more serious than we are acknowledging?
I certainly don't think so based on what I've been reading and seeing. I think a lot of people are engaging with some of this stuff at the level of TikTok and YouTube. And there you can have a visual image that sometimes is not even of the thing that it is claiming that it is of. I'm not sure why someone would think that they could get tortured over things that they had said about the Trump administration on the internet. I don't see how somebody could feel that that is a likely possibility. I haven't seen anything that would evince that as a likely possibility. Is this person not a citizen? Are they worried about deportation? Is there something specific? Have they participated in criminal activity? Have they committed maybe a kind of anarcho terrorist act?
Not in the case of this friend. She's not doing any kind of secret organizing, but she's been openly anti the Trump administration. And because of that, and she's not the only one, I know a few people locally here in Boise who feel this way, because they've been openly against it, they think they're being added to lists. They think they're going to get rounded up. They think that they're going to potentially get tortured. My response to all of that was to say, everything on the internet. But, and when I say, by the way, before I say what I said to this friend is also what I said to another friend. This friend lives somewhere else in the country, not in Idaho. This friend, the one I just read aloud, is closer to our age, Benjamin. So in that spectrum of the 30s, whereas the friend who lives locally is in his 60s. And both of these friends read theory. Both of these friends also watch the news, right? So it's watching a lot of the news, I think, is a huge factor for both of these friends. But this one who's local and is in his 60s, he said he was going to delete everything as well. Maybe this was like the first week after the election results. He was really spiraling. And I gave him the same sort of message that I gave this person who lives a lot further away and it definitely belongs to a different generation. And the message was basically like, hey, I'm not sure what you're I'm not sure what you are getting from the news. I don't watch it all day, every day. But what I can say is that the people who watch and or listen to the news all day, every day, for my whole life, are always telling me it's the end of the world and that things are really bad. But those people are never capable of really tarrying with the fact that child slavery exists to make this world go round. So it's always like all this hysteria about how bad things are, but they don't seem capable of tarrying with how bad things are. So what's going on here? Right? And I kind of say, look, I'm very cynical. I'm very black-pilled. I'm very burnt out on all of this. But like, what did you think was going to happen? And it's so what I'm kind of getting at is, on the one side, it feels like people are saying that the sky is falling, but at the same time, the sky already fell, and they're not capable of acknowledging that the sky already fell. And so part of what I end up doing is some sort of like, glass of ice water in the face followed by a slap, and I go, wake up! You're being a coward, and at the same time, you're not coming to terms with the severity of the situation, right? And I will read this person's message in a minute after she watched that live stream I was referring to from 8 days ago. But first, I just kind of want to see what you make of this, and I'm also curious if any of the people in your life are spiraling as hard as these friends of mine.
Ooh, yeah, television news doesn't do anybody any good, especially not in this day and age. I firmly recommend that people avoid getting their news from television, in part because the goal with television is to keep you watching as long as possible. And television gives you no control over what you see. It's one thing dished out for everybody watching that network. At least with TikTok, there's an algorithm that responds in some way to you and what it is that you choose to watch, what it is that you tend to focus on. Does the TikTok algorithm take advantage of in various ways certain weaknesses that we have in terms of the way that we're wired? Yes, I think it does. But at least there's some room for you to have a different TikTok from other people on the basis of decisions that you make. Maybe you aren't able to stay conscious enough of the time when you're on TikTok to make those decisions on the basis of the right things, but you are at least participatory in the process of getting your TikTok feed. Cable television is the absolute worst thing anybody can have in their media diet. I never watch television news. I hardly even watch clips of television news unless something is extraordinarily viral to the point at which it's a national news story that's being covered on social media, on the internet. The television news anchors, none of them are trustworthy or intellectually interesting, regardless of which channel we're talking about. So anybody who's making decisions about what level of threat they face based on watching television is engaging in something that is very unhelpful, not just for them, but the people around them who then have to burn a bunch of energy explaining why the television is not an accurate description of reality. In my own life, we don't watch television news in Indiana at my house. My mother doesn't watch television news. And in part because she doesn't watch television news, she is not nearly as worked up about these things as most people her age. We will hear sometimes about people in the community who have been watching a lot of television news and the way that they're feeling. But this is not something that the people in my inner circle do. In part, maybe because they know me and they know that I think it's negative information. I think it's worse than not engaging with the news at all. You're better off completely ignoring everything that happens than watching television news. It's a negative use of your time if you're doing it.
Yeah, which is what I tend to do, though, of course, my phone recommends various news articles to me that I tried to turn off the notifications for the news notifications. It's just my phone likes to tell me about various news things, and there's nothing I can do about it, apparently. I try to swipe away on those before I even see them, and I try to base my sense for what's going on by the things that people are saying. And then if something's super concerning, I might look into it a little bit. But I'm not desensitized. I just don't trust like that. Right? I don't trust that the kinds of people who are deciding what you should see on television have your best interests in mind. And I don't trust that they care about moving away from a job-centric society towards one that could have T3 institutions where you can discover your talents and cultivate them under the tutelage of others in environments and institutions that secure for you large energy infused repeatable blocks of time made reliably available for all. That's not on the agenda. And as long as that's not on the agenda, and they can't at the same time deal with the fact that our little world does require a global system that reduces entire countries to slavery, why would we take their sense of stakes or priorities seriously? Right? Like that's but at the same time, look, I get it. Important things are going on. All right. And so I'll let you say something to that there, Benjamin, because I think you're about to say something. But then I'll read the follow-up message that I got after that stream a couple days later.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'll read articles, but if I click a link to something and it gives me a video, I get rid of it immediately. I don't bother with video. Really, unless it's something that you have to see to understand it, I'd rather read the text. I particularly do not like the emotional displays that American politicians especially make when they talk. And I'm just not interested in watching them or listening to them because they're agitating. They're designed to work you up and make you unhappy and upset you, which causes you to not be able to think or to get things done. I'm somebody who tries very often. Most days I'm alive, I make an attempt at some point in the day to write something that's actually good. I can't afford to be continuously stirred up by videos that people shove in front of my face. You think I could ever write anything good if I was watching that stuff all the time? And if you want to do something interesting with your life, you think you're going to do anything interesting if you're constantly getting your energy stirred up by this stuff? And what it does is it creates, sentiments that historically we have viewed as very vice-oriented. It creates envy. It creates wrath. It creates very, very negative kinds of sentiments in people. Why would you subject yourself to that all the time? Because you think you're getting informed doing it? Nobody who produces that kind of energy in you is informing you. They're just working you up. Why are they working you up? So you'll feel like you have to keep looking because otherwise you might miss something. Well, what are you going to do about the news anyway? You're too worked up to do anything about it. You're too worked up to talk to anybody about it who disagrees with you in any way about it. So what difference does it make whether you're up to date with it or not? Are you going to do anything? How are you going to do anything in that kind of agitated state? Nobody accomplishes anything of value when they're in the kind of mood and operating with the kind of energy that television generates. What it does is it creates a bunch of pseudo activity that doesn't do anybody a lick of good.
I want to agree, and I think I do, especially with what I think is the spirit of what you're saying. But I also want to agree under a certain caveat. If you're curious to know what that caveat will be, dear listener, then stick around. We're going to play a quick little thing, and we'll be right back after this. It's lagging out. Hold on one sec. I'm going to have to... There we go.
Oh, hey, Dave. What are you up to?
Hello. I'm grading right now. So.
Grading? Well, what's that?
Oh, this? This is a G2 pen. It might be the best pen in the entire world because the price point is perfect for working class people like us. More importantly, cartridges are replaceable. The ink, it glides, but it doesn't smudge too bad. And most importantly, you can do that. And it's really fun.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
We at Theory Underground are not sponsored by Pilot, nor does Pilot endorse this commercial. Theory Underground is funded by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
All right, bringing it back around here. And here we are. I'll bring up my little caveat to Benjamin's point in a moment. But first, I want to read, as I promised, that message from that person that I was responding to in that stream, right? And so what she said was, this is a couple days later, she said, "Hey, Mr. Dave, you totally saved me today. I was about to not only end my YouTube account, but I was going to give up on the project where I blah, blah, blah." It's a project this person's working on. It could help you know who it is, so I'm going to skip that. And that's my life's calling. I felt a lot of despair. Thank you for doing the uncomfortable act of not allowing me to just sink into the nihilism. You're a super good guy. Please say hi to Anne for me too, blah, blah, blah. I got a blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. And then one of the things she was saying was that she had kind of made a decision to not even speak to Republicans, that there's all these Republicans in her life, and she was cutting them out. And then she was even thinking about cutting out listening to Benjamin Studebaker. And then she said, "So yeah, I really freaked out." And then she sobbed for another 3 hours, and now she feels restored. And so it's actually very similar to my old friend, like my elderly friend who lives locally, when he was spiraling and he thought he needed to delete everything he's ever done online and scrub everything because he was worried that Trump was going to round him up, and he was like, same thing. So, I don't know what they're seeing on television, but it has them concerned they're going to get rounded up. And pretty much what I hit him with was, remember, they're going to try to make you think that this is like a 2% increase in white males, not voting for Democrats or something that is the issue. And what they're going to detract your awareness from is the fact that Democrats chose this. Democrats chose anti-populism during a populist era in 2016. They chose that. That was a choice. And now they've been trying to make everybody think that the little person is responsible ever since. and we're being gaslit. They've chosen this, and it's actually lucrative for them to choose this. So, yeah, no, I don't buy it. So I say that kind of thing. I don't buy it. And I try to be very blunt and very honest, yet at the same time, compassionate. And my elderly friend locally, he was like, maybe I just need to get out of my house. And so we went and saw a movie together, and then we hung out afterwards. And then he messaged me the next day and said, I was really spiraling there. I hadn't done anything but watch the news for like a whole week. Just getting out, watching a movie, eating some food, breathing some fresh air really did help. And I think there's also something about like these people know that I'm radical in their whatever that means to them. They see me as someone who is not sleeping well at night because of the global state of things. And they know that all of my activities are somehow directed towards trying to make something better about that. So, some kind of activist impression that they have about me, even though what I do is some kind of anti-activism in my mind, from their standpoint, I still have those qualifications. And so for them to see that I'm not as freaked out about getting rounded up makes them go, wait a minute, you're not worried about getting tortured? If anyone's getting tortured, Dave, it's you. And I want to just look at the camera right now and say, no, I'm not getting tortured. I'm not worried about it at all. I'm serious about that. I'm not worried about right-wing militias. I think that a lot of those guys are very good people. I genuinely mean that. I think most military and police people are very good people. I'm not worried at all. And at the point that I am worried, well, what would worrying have done? That's the thing, is if I turn out to be wrong, what would have worrying up until the point that I get rounded up, what would that even do anyway? But then the last point, and several people said this here in the live chat, we're in the CIA's lobby, people. They built the internet, man. There's no deleting the things that you've said. I mean, yeah, you could delete it so that Benjamin and I can't see it anymore. But as far as the CIA, of course, whenever I say CIA, that's a metonym for the entire intelligence apparatus, right? I'm sorry, like they not only do they build the internet, and not only do they have access to all the big data, that includes like your fingerprint, your digital block's fingerprint. You can use VPNs. You can do all your messaging encrypted. It doesn't change the fact that they've got your data block. The machines are a lot smarter at this point. It doesn't require human beings watching everyone all the time. It's not like that at all. It's not like they care about you. That's where the delusions of grandeur come in. That's where people end up on these sort of psychotic, paranoiac, conspiracy-brained sort of freak-out episodes, which I'm sympathetic to. I'm sympathetic to it, guys. I totally get it. But it's delusions of grandeur. You think that they care about you? They don't care about you. They care about statistics. They're institutions. They see us as numbers. What they're concerned about are certain tendencies, and they might do certain things to change or try to counter those tendencies or to try to guide those tendencies, but they don't care about you as a person. And the idea that they're out here like reading your posts, like actively going, oh no, that person said something bad about us, we're gonna come for them. I don't think we're there yet. That's my point.
And it's because they think that the Speech Act is revolutionary activity, that they think that the feds would have an interest in them. They think the Speech Act is revolutionary activity. The feds don't care about the things that you're posting unless they have reason to think that the things that you're posting are indicative of something that you're likely to do. And these people, by and large, they're watching television and then they're talking on the internet. Millions and millions of people in the country do that. If that was a problem for the government, there would be a huge job to be done. It's not a problem for the government. It's not a problem at all. The stuff that people are doing that they think is dissent is not meaningful dissent from the point of view of the state. Are you in some way behaving in such a way that the state's order is going to become difficult or impossible to maintain? Are you creating a public order problem of the kind that the state is going to need to respond to? Otherwise, it potentially will collapse or succumb to revolution or civil conflict. No, you're posting on the internet and watching television. And this is, it's pride. It's pride. That's the other thing this stuff generates. Not just envy, not just wrath, pride. People think that because they're following the news, they're important. And for one, if you're following the television news, you're not following the real news. You're following the garbage that is put out there for people who are susceptible to garbage and who are willing to believe that garbage is the news. You watching television does not make you a more effective opponent of the state. It makes you a less effective opponent. It makes you somebody whose consciousness is predictable because you're reacting to something that is being broadcast to millions of people, which will tend to affect those millions of people in a broadly statistically predictable way. So it makes you weak, it makes you easy to predict. And if the state wanted to go after people who watch television, it wouldn't be that hard because they've already got a way of reaching them all at once with the same message. And they know plenty about how people respond to television. There's been plenty of research about that for decades and decades and decades. So yes, the internet is a major part of why the United States at this point has unparalleled intelligence on a lot of different states, because a lot of states in some way, shape, or form are dependent upon the American internet. And if you're the Russian Federation and you conduct your defense chats on the internet or through mobile phone networks, it's very difficult to prevent the United States from getting those communications. And this is why I made the point, this is a while back, about it seems to me that the United States has extraordinarily good inside intelligence on the conversation within the Kremlin. It seems likely to me that people involved in the defense apparatus in the Russian Federation are using the internet in such a way that they can be watched.
Mm.
And here's the thing, you can tell people this and they can say that they're so scared, they're so afraid, and they're going to keep using their phones and the internet. They're not going to stop doing it because it's not serious. None of this is serious. What it often is it's a projection of, I'm more upset about this than anybody else. This is horrible, bad stuff, and I'm having the strongest normative reaction to it. Therefore, I must be better than all of the people who don't have such a strong normative reaction. There's a ton of pride involved in this. And thinking that because my normative reaction is stronger than most people's, I must be a concern for the state. No. No, that's not how it works at all. It's hubris, incredible hubris on the part of people who talk in this way.
Mm-hmm. Now, I said I was going to bring up a caveat to agreeing with your point on the moods being stirred up here, but there's a couple of comments worth reading from the chat here. Jailbro Supreme said, on an FBI watch list equals I'm relevant. I think that is exactly what I'm getting at with the delusions of grandeur side of things. But then Adam, shout out to Adam Mad, says, I think this focus on TV news is strange. And so I do want to say something about that. Now, I really liked what Skip said. Allowing us to post on the internet is a method of control, right? An outlet for our feelings. And so that's a nice little bridge from what Adam brought up, right? So we're talking about TV news, and you're saying that the focus on it is strange. And I think that everything that we're saying about TV news bridges over to internet identity formation or identity consumerism via the internet. And obviously the two people that I'm talking about must be on mainstream television at the same time that they're on their phones, or they wouldn't be talking about the need to scrub their phones. There's something about people trying to hold a foot in both worlds that's making them want to delete their engagement in one world, but not the other. If we're thinking about just in a sort of behaviorist sense, like what that means, I mean, it does raise an actual hypothesis that could probably be the whole subject of a research endeavor. We're not going to do it, but if anyone does take this up, I'm very curious to know. might mainstream media be actively trying to use this moment to get people to choose one form of media, theirs, and to get you off of the internet?
And
Because
wasn't this also done the other way around with respect to Fox? When everybody on social media was saying that it's the television news, the Fox News, that causes them all to be Trump voters and makes them into reactionaries. There's a lot of this is competition among media companies trying to make you feel that other media companies are the cause of all of the problems. So either the social media companies are the cause or the television companies are the cause. But the wonderful thing about being a millennial is that we came into the world at a time when television was falling apart, but TikTok had not yet arrived. And so we're able to recognize the ways in which these things rhyme and complement each other. And the degree to which what we hear from younger people about what they're seeing on TikTok reminds us of what we used to hear from older people about what they were watching on TV. And so I think if you're younger, you're able to see what's wrong with the television. And if you're older, you're able to see what's wrong with TikTok. Now, try to think about how what's wrong with the one that's obviously wrong might also be wrong with the one that's less obviously wrong.
Right.
And then instead of watching videos, try reading.
And that's my segue into this caveat. And so basically, let's see if I can put back together what you said. I think what you were saying right before that little commercial break for the G2 pen was the news is stirring up in you, as the news viewer, certain kinds of energies that put you into certain kinds of headspaces and or moods that makes it so you're not able to write. You're not able to get the critical distance necessary for reflection, which is, in part, writing. Writing is the process of distancing yourself a little bit from all of that and doing a critical reflection thing, right? Now, it doesn't have to be. All of your writing could be purely reactive. You could be only writing in reaction and never in a state of skole or agape, right? So just kind of using the terminology, I think that at this point should be fine for people who've been following the podcast, right? Agape being a kind of universal love, the writing that you do being an outpouring from that kind of attunement, as opposed to something that you're doing just for recognition, time, something that you're doing just for efficiency or profit, pragma, as opposed to what you would be doing for self-love. What was the one for self-love again? The Greek word?
It's a tricky one to pronounce.
Yeah, it was.
Philotia.
Philatia. And the thing is I, as I've been going over in my my recent lectures with people, I'm trying to really get everyone on this one basic point. Genuine being with other people requires also being able to figure out how to genuinely be with oneself. So solitude and solicitude make up the virtuous circle, right? Quality time with self results in more quality time with others. And it's iterative, and the two sides are reciprocally determinative. You could say that they are dialectical, but you could also say that they create a cyber positive feedback loop, right? They amplify each other. But solitude, in this genuine being with oneself, this fullness of being with oneself idea, that is not easy. It's not easy. People feel anxious. People feel afraid. People feel depressed. At minimum, they feel bored when they are in isolation, right? Isolation could be terrifying. I've seen people going around asking, what's more terrifying than being alone with yourself? And people are like sitting there going, nothing. Like there's like, it's kind of crazy. Like people have like such a hard time. And of course, Pascal said so many of the world's problems would go away if people could just learn to sit with themselves. But what Sherry Turkle says in Reclaiming Conversation is that that virtuous circle that comes from first achieving solitude, this fullness with self, does require some hardship. It does require overcoming certain kinds of anxieties that you do experience when by yourself. And that those are things you have to write through or walk off, right? So like the kind of walking or hiking that is a real like being with yourself instead of like distracting yourself with podcasts or music, but just like a real like the kind of the communion with self is what she's going for. And of course she draws somewhat off of Hannah Arendt, for whom that dialogue between me and myself that she is so inspired from, I think Socrates is where she gets this language, but that dialogue between me and myself that happens in solitude is where you're able to ask yourself, can I keep going along with society the way that I am? If I keep going along with society the way that I am, can I live with myself? Right? Can I live with myself if I keep living this way? That is the basis for moral, critical reflection. And obviously the reason that Arendt cares about that as a Holocaust survivor, right, is, well, a lot of people go along with the flow and it's easier for people to go along with the flow when they're not getting these opportunities for what she's saying is the basis of morality itself, which is that question: can I keep living with myself if I keep going along this way? She's saying with administrative evil or the banality of evil, she's saying people aren't getting that, right? And so, Turkle is based in Arendtian pilled, at least to enough of an extent to be able to talk about solitude in this way that is Arendtian. I've taken it a lot further in how I think about how solitude and solicitude relate. I tie these things, the breakdown of those, into what Heidegger calls falling, which is something he gets from Kierkegaard, which is how average everyday discourse is ambiguity, non-committal curiosity, and chit-chat, idle talk. And those things create their own kind of cybernetic positive feedback loop, right? So when you lose solitude and solicitude, it creates this spiral where everything stays pretty superficial and frantic. It's frantic, and it's a different kind of energy, right? But what Heidegger and Kierkegaard and Sherry Turkle and Hannah Arendt all miss, because they don't think about the historical, political, economic conditions of possibility, is time, energy, and labor power. And this all sets me up for my little caveat on the mood thing, which is just to say, the reason that the virtuous circle between solitude and solicitude breaks down is not, as Sherry Turkle thinks, because parents are on their phones and then giving their tablets to their children and saying, oh, distract yourself on this, and that we're all just addicted to our phones now. This was the problem of the breakdown between solitude and solicitude existed prior to the smartphone. So people blame the smartphone, but that was already breaking down because people don't have time energy. Time energy is necessary for cultivating meaningful relationships with oneself or with others, right? And so that's a real problem, but it's also a problem that is not fully a choice for individuals. We're surviving. We have to work. If we have to work in a job-centric society, a space of skole from which to write in agape or from agape is impossible, or at least extremely difficult, right? And I now I'm caveating myself here just to say, I do hope that it's possible for people who really struggle to find that because they have jobs. But going with the idea that it's impossible, just to kind of like really be extreme here for a moment, let's just kind of play with this idea, because I kind of really want to hear your response. And first I want to hear your response to the hard version of what I'm saying, and then I can walk it back maybe. But the extreme version is just, it's actually impossible for working class people to enter a space of skole because they don't have time energy, which maybe they could have something kind of similar to Scole, but it wouldn't be repeatable or reliable, and therefore it's not Scole. And so it makes it a lot harder to get into that space of agape. And because they are systematically and structurally separated from the ability to get into that space, there are all kinds of things that means at the level of their energy, at the level of their mood, at the level of their desire, and at the level of their drive. I say all of those things because they are all separate and interrelated, and anybody who can write how they're related and actually tease out the differences between the theorists that are the most well-known theorists for these different components, I'm sure you could write a great dissertation on that, and we would all be very curious to see how you would relate these things. But for right now, let's just kind of analytically suppose that energies and moods and desires and drives are different things. They're getting at different things, but they're all related and they overlap in various ways. And it's a very complicated thing to work through, because our fundamental attunements are one thing. Our fundamental dispositions are one thing. And how we survive, how we cope on a week-to-week basis is another thing. And so I'll wrap it up by just saying catharsis is important because you do have to go back to work. You do have to keep your head above water. And obviously, if the news is making you want to delete everything and hide because you think you're going to get rounded up and tortured, well, maybe it's not helping you go back to work. Maybe it's not helping you cope anymore. But also, it can function as a pressure release valve for all of the weird intensities that build up for you throughout the week. Hating on Donald Trump and Republicans, or vice versa, can help you release something that is building up that does need release. Right? It does need release. There's a big question mark that I'll put on this is like, well, maybe there's other ways that could be released. Right? And there's a much bigger conversation I'd like to do as a follow-up where we really unpack all these different terms and components. But just for now, let's, just, I don't know. I guess I kind of want to say, Benjamin, how to make this all one question. Might not people's habits, even though they're part of the problem and they're not really helping them in any long-term sense, nonetheless have a short-term sort of, if not positive effect, at least some kind of, it helps them get through the week without snapping at their boss or losing their job. Or something like
that's
that.
a plausible point, that some of the things people are doing in terms of pseudo-politics is a way of working out certain resentments, which otherwise might be more productively directed in their own lives. You think about it, there's also a lot of ways to blow up and ruin your life because you don't like what's going on. People often engage in all kinds of other bad habits because they don't like what's going on in terms of how they eat, in terms of how they drink, in terms of use of drugs, in terms of having affairs. There's a lot of other things people do in what might be thought of as their private lives that have a similar function to this getting worked up about politics. The difficulty is to find an outlet for that energy that is constructive. And the trouble is that when this kind of energy builds up, there are all these off-ramps for it that are not constructive from the point of view of trying to emancipate people and give them time energy, but are functional from the point of view of trying to sustain various kinds of entanglements that all end in you being blamed. You're the crazy person who overreacted. You're the crazy person who is the sex addict, is the drug addict, is the food addict, is the alcoholic. You're the one who ultimately at the end of the day has done these things. You're the one who couldn't handle it, couldn't take it. And the horrible thing about this system is that you're offered these off-ramps, and then should you take them, you will be blamed for having taken them. They are presented to you. They're presented to you very prominently. Recently in the States, we've added a couple in terms of cannabis all over the place and in terms of gambling all over the place on your phone whenever you want. And these off-ramps are there. You can take them. But if you do take them, if you really take them, if you don't just use them as a little side hobby, but you actually become quite involved with any of them, you will be the one who is blamed for the condition of things. And that's the horrible thing about how all of this works. Ultimately, it's the people who think that they care and think that they're doing something about all of it that will be blamed for having not only done nothing, but made it worse in various ways. You become, by trying to do something about Trump, the kind of person that is used by supporters of Trump to make an argument for why Trumpism is necessary. And you become, by trying to do something about the Democrats, the kind of person who becomes a reason for the Democrats to do what they do. It is a very serious problem. I don't have an easy answer in terms of, is there a way to take that energy and make it productive? I do think that's something that we've got to think about, because this kind of energy is getting generated all the time. It's a very, very, there's a ton of it out there. And so if there was something useful to do with it, that would be helpful. But if you're right in saying that people who are working just don't have time energy, it seems to me difficult to see how you could use this energy constructively unless you were operating on the premise that these are people to be manipulated in some way, right? Because the function of the large repeatable blocks of time energy is to be able to give you the capacity to think about what you're doing, to get that solitude, that philautia that's necessary to contemplate your relation to things, and then return to those things with a changed countenance so as to constructively and productively act in a way that is good and not just a way of perpetuating. And if you can't do those things, then your frustrated, resentful, angry energy can only be manipulated. It can't be something you can consciously use. Because you have to have, I think, time energy to be able to reflect on your energy in such a way that you can structure your life in such a way that you get the energy you need to do the things that you have, upon reflection, decided that you really want to do, that you really care about doing, the things that you think are actually good to do. And when people don't have any of that, then they're not able to exercise decision-making power, which is why Aristotle claims that people who don't have access to leisure are slaves, who can't choose their own ends. So if you want to say that nonetheless it is possible for people in this situation to make meaningful choices, then you would have to allow for some possibility of limited forms of time energy, that there could be some kind of limited or partial type of leisure that might nonetheless allow them to reflect on what they're doing and make decisions. And this is where we get into this big debate that I think is being had all over the place right now about, are we still able to reason with people? Are people still in a circumstance such that we can give them an argument about what they should do or about what matters, that even if they don't immediately agree with, they can reflect upon, and then perhaps upon reflection come around to, maybe over a period of time? And I think one of the troubles in the PCFM is that it doesn't seem, at least, to be the case that this can be done. In which case, this is why it would seem to me that it doesn't make sense simply to scold the workers for not having the right politics, nor does it make sense to me to scold the professionals for not saying the right things to the workers. Because the professionals and the workers are both, for different but related reasons, unable to reflect on their activity in such a way that they can change it in response to this kind of argument. Which leaves me trying to talk to what I assume to be a quite small number of people who are able to constructively interface with me about this stuff because their circumstances are abnormal in some way. There's something about their situation which allows them to participate in this in a way that most people, for various reasons, are not able to participate. Now, one possibility is that perhaps there's something special about the worker with earbuds, that the possession of the earbuds or the kind of routine that that sort of worker has is meaningfully different in certain ways, which permit, for one, it disables the video. You can't have video if you're a worker with earbuds. So therefore, you do have to engage with words, maybe not text, maybe not reading, but words. That is a meaningful difference in terms of how the discussion proceeds for someone in that circumstance. And then we've also got people who do have access to, I think, different and bizarre circumstances, which do permit more leisure and more reflection than most. Aristotle would have framed leisure as a distributive thing, as something which you can have more or less of in relation to amusement or work, other kinds of activity that you might do. So it wouldn't be an on or off necessarily, but something you could have more or less of. But then in addition to having more or less of it, you need a community of people who possess it, who can therefore have discourse, who can reason together on the basis of their shared possession of it. So one of the things I think we're trying to do at Theory Underground is to construct something like that, construct a community which is able to have knowledge in common, because that would be the basis for having a real demos, right? A citizen body that has knowledge in common because it possesses the prerequisites for being able to reason and is therefore able to have dialectic on the basis of those shared prerequisites. The difficulty is that you've still got a lot of people who are insisting that it should be possible for everybody to participate in this, even though things have changed in these various ways. And that to suggest that perhaps we have reached a stage where not everyone can participate is right-wing, constitutively right-wing. Whereas I would say what would be right-wing would be to essentialize that and to say that that is a permanent transhistorical condition based on distribution of natural ability or talent. I think the idea that you can have moments where different sets of people have different levels of access to the things that they need to develop their capacities, that would just be standard left-wing thinking at most points in time in the history of the left. But what has happened in recent decades is that there has become a kind of insistence against the evidence of our eyes and ears that it's possible for everyone in society to participate immediately right now in a reasonable discussion, a kind of Rawlsian or Habermasian insistence that this kind of deliberation is possible right now, or if it's not possible right now, that the obstacles to it are transient and easy to overcome with mild reforms to the way the media or the discourse or the algorithms or the social media companies or whatever, the internet, the way these things operate, that the only problem is the deliberative structures in which the discussion is happening, or the kind of language people are using, or that people are bringing in specific illicit tactics that skew or pollute in some way the discussion. And I think this misses that it's much more fundamental at this stage. We have more fundamental problems talking than just this, we have a non-ideal deliberation with various kinds of skews in it that could be removed if we just, got rid of the phones, or we got rid of the television, or we got rid of this or that, or we changed or reformed or regulated the internet in this or that way, or AI, or whatever it is that we think is the culprit or the group of culprits. Rather, I think that there are actual reasons why it has become much harder to do this. Now, that wouldn't be to say that nobody can do it. I do think that there is still, and indeed there has to be, the only way that you can transform a real tyranny for Plato is for it to be nonetheless possible in a real tyranny for some number of people to still engage in reason and to think about what to do, and to then make a move of some kind that's constructive, that allows you to refound the city or give it anew, right? The only way that you can get out from the fracturing of the general will for Marx is for the proletariat to reconstitute that will through self-conscious activity that is done through a party in which it's possible for the working class to, through the party, have a discussion that's grounded in reason and epistemic knowledge that the working class builds up over time through the party mechanism, so that the party can curate and preside over an ongoing discussion in which there's growth, there's learning. If you don't have structures like this that allow knowledge to be held in common by a community of knowers, then what you get is just repeated mistakes all the time, as everything is immediately memory hold and forgotten. And this is something that can occur even without any of the digital stuff, even without the television, without the internet. If you just don't have functional structures for people who possess a certain amount of leisure time, whatever amount it is, to commit that time to common use through a dialectical engagement in that kind of institutional setting. So that'd be kind of my initial set of thoughts. And I think in my own life, I've been very lucky with regard to leisure time. And I've also worked very hard to have a lot of it, which has allowed me to write some of the stuff that I've written. But one of the major challenges is it's extremely hard to find a group of people that you can talk about this stuff with who can stay in the discussion for any lengthy period of time. And that's where I think you do have a point. But one of the major differences between what we're saying and a lot of other people on the left, they would insist nonetheless that this must be possible now, that it has to be possible. And if it's not possible, then there's no left-wing possibility at all. For them, being able to talk to everybody all at once, that there's an insistence that society exists, and that you can have this kind of discussion occurring at the level of society. You just have to make the relevant structures. You have to go and make the new media and find a way to enter into the new media and get across the message in a way that is transmits human reason. And I think there's still a deep insistence upon this. And it's in part because people don't want to make the concession. They don't want to acknowledge that it's gotten this bad. That we have not been able to move forward with new approaches.
I don't know if I want to address what people are talking about in the chat or just move on to what I want to talk about. Yeah, I want to move on to what I want to talk about, which is directly related to what you're saying here, Benjamin, about the potential of workers with earbuds. So you responded to my hard case. My hard case was there's no time energy for Scholé, for working people to get this kind of removal or distance. And because we are broken, because we are structurally stultified, because our libidinal economies have formed within that context of structural stultification of time energy and the breakdown of solitude and solicitude, we have each and every one of us a complex assortment of habits and addictions or coping mechanisms or off-ramps, as Benjamin was saying. Also, a popular one is for people to talk about pressure release valves. All of that is what we're getting at whenever we say libidinal economy. I'm trying to add other dimensions to libidinal economy, though, that go beyond the typical psychoanalytic categories by bringing in Benjamin's more Platonic ones. And I do think that there might be a way of talking across the entire history of Western philosophy where we, in a sort of broad brush way, just kind of call them all energies. And I think as a sort of basic starting point for that conversation you had with Mikey about Lacan and Plato versus Deleuze, which was fantastic, by the way. It was really good. So for people who haven't seen that one really is worth checking out. It's the beginning of something that I just absolutely love, is seeing you both kind of trying to think through these differences. My point is that it is a good starting point to say that these things are similar, that a lot of these things that Lacan is getting at do relate to these things that Plato's getting at. But also, like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Lacan ever comes along and says that Scholé is a precondition for kind of just staying in a state of agape. Right? I don't think Lacan is thinking about that. Socrates in Plato's Republic is thinking, in order for people to make good decisions for the good of all, to be able to do the kinds of actions necessary for a life lived in how to say it, wisdom, like the good life and wisdom, and how those two things can go together. It does require a certain kind of person being able to be removed from all of that, right? People who are constantly focused on efficiency and profit, like the merchants, or people who are incessantly preoccupied with necessary labor, like the workers or slaves. Like, these are not people capable of getting that kind of distance, right? Lacan doesn't talk about that. Lacan doesn't deal with that. He doesn't have to think about it, right? He's dealing with a specific kind of person on his couch, you know? So there's this important task for people who want to think about libidinal economy, to also think across historical time and talk about how things were different, but also how different theorists might offer us different insight into different sort of components or dynamics of the human spirit. So with all of that said, bringing in mood and energies to libidinal economy, I think really helps set us up for a really cool kind of conversation that I'm looking forward to watching develop, especially between us and Mikey through the ongoing seminars at TU. Because the seminar, for each of the three of us who have a seminar, it's just a place for us to do what we want, to talk about what we want for as long as we want. It's really just like a place for us to work out our ideas. But it's also kind of in this, we always say this, the silent weaving of the spirit, right? In this sort of Hegelian sense. It's where these things are kind of working themselves out. And so I'm looking forward to going a lot deeper into all of that. That's basically what I wanted to say. But on the note about the possibility of workers with earbuds being able to do something different, because Theory Underground has doubled its subscriber base in the last month, which, that's pretty cool. So, announcement time, everybody. That's right. That happened. So give it up and go ahead and clap wherever you are. If you're in an Amazon workhouse right now, or you're driving somewhere, go ahead and just give it up. I hope that you'll hoot and holler and people will look at you weird. But, it's something to be excited about, and I'm very happy about it. But it's also brought growing pains in various ways. People trying to hack us is just one of those things that we're dealing with. People mass reporting and flagging our videos and getting some of our stuff taken down. It's just one of those things. People impersonating us in the comment sections and trying to sow division and discord. Like, these kinds of things just come with the territory of growing. But one of the things that happened in the last month that I realized is we do have people who are coming for this idea of it's a working class and professional kind of alternative education. And because they have certain preconceptions about what that means, there's a sort of misrecognition that's occurred where some people are coming along and going, you guys really need to cut down your videos. You guys really need to make these 1 hour episodes. You guys really need to cut out all the extra stuff and just make it quick and to the point. And this is something that I was resisting and giving into, and resisting and giving into through all kinds of stuff that I've done over the last 10 years. And I think the conversation I had with Gerald in 2021, the very, very beginning of 2021, Gerald Smith, the former Black Panther, lifelong activist, Marxist-Leninist from the Bay Area. He lives in Oakland. The resistance I received from him is sort of like the perfect example of what I'm getting at here. Though, of course, Norman Finkelstein is also the same. There's something about these old media-brained kinds of, I'll call them leftist elders, right? They have a specific approach to getting word out to the working class. And it's basically, it needs to be short, succinct, or another way of saying that is to the point, right? And the reason that became such a big thing with Gerald Smith was we went there wanting to talk about Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and a handful of these other popular things at the time. And especially because his perspective is like a lifelong activist and a Marxist, the fact that he was so anti-BLM, so anti Antifa, so anti black nationalism. I thought, he's got a message a lot of leftists online need to hear. And that's why we went to Oakland to talk to him. But then he was like thinking that these were going to be 15-minute interviews and that they all need to be separate. And we were like, our standard is like a 3-hour conversation. And he goes, "Oh, that's bullshit, plebe. You can't do that to people. People don't want to hear your blogs." Like, this is how he talked, right? "People don't want to hear your blogs, plebe." And I said, "Blogs? It's a stream." And he's just like, "It's all blogs to me." And his idea is like, there's real radio, there's real television, and then there's what you kids are doing on the podcasts or blogs. He just calls it all blogs. And he doesn't care. Like, internet numbers mean nothing to him. And over the course of the couple of days that I was there, I was just like, it basically came down to this. It's like, "Hey, Gerald, did you know that Joe Rogan, the JRE, Joe Rogan Experience, does all of their stuff as 3-hour episodes? At 3 hours is the podcast standard, and that this podcast is more popular than all mainstream media combined. That it's reaching more people, and those people are workers." And that at that point, he cut me off and said, "Those ain't workers." He said, "Those are inferior human resources." And I was like, "Jesus Christ, man, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "No, we Leninists, we talk to the advanced workers. The advanced workers are the journeymen, the electricians, the plumbers, the factory workers, the advanced proletarians." And I was like, "Gerald, everyone I know is like working at grocery stores and coffee shops. Plebe, those are inferior human resources. We cannot organize the proletariat by developing our messages for them." And I was like, trying to be charitable and work with him. And I was like, "Look, man, you might see it that way. You might say that. But at the end of the day, I'm an inferior human resource. Could we just do these interviews for inferior human resources? Can we just do that all right? Because that is who I'm assuming." All of that to say, we've always assumed that with our MSTUs, with our long streams, with our long seminars. We've always assumed people who have loads of disposable time when they're at work, because they can disassociate from the menial, mundane labor and focus in on something for 10 hours, right? I am that person. Nance is that person. That person is not your average working class person, but we're hedging our bets. Our bets that we're hedging assume that this kind of worker that we are is going to grow. There will be more and more people working more and more mundane, menial kinds of jobs, where if you don't learn to multitask and disassociate from the bullshit that you're doing at the moment and hone in on ideas, you're going to suffer more. You're going to suffer more, and you're not going to be developing yourself the same way. Because if you can get into that kind of headspace, like, I'm smiling at Amazon, man. Like, yeah, the hours suck, but outside of the hours sucking, it's the easiest job in the world. I'm able to listen to entire books, like 2 or 3 days, and I can listen to a whole like book, Discipline and Punish. I listen to that just while working, right? Moshe Pessone's Time, Labor, and Social Domination. I just listened to it while working. Every article that any one of my intellectual friends or fellow travelers shared with me, I could just plug in and listen to it while I was working. What we're getting at is the potential. That's what Benjamin was raising here. There's a potential here. It's an untapped potential. There are so many things that could come from it. We have no idea what can come from it. So everybody in the chat, you might be one of these people. You might be one of these people that we're talking about. You tune in when you can. Ian Cochrane, who was here right at the beginning, and we shouted him out before we started recording the episode. Ian said, I forget what he said, but I know that he is painting in Wales every time he's in stream. He just paints the interior of houses. And he's been in Zoom calls while we're teaching courses, and he's on the ladder painting. And he is usually there from the very beginning of a epic marathon stream at Theory Underground, MSTU. And then he's there all freaking day. And this is a man who's in his 40s, and he's able to follow the whole line. And then you have people come along and they get angry at us for doing longer form content. And it's like, look, I get it. You like it short and bite-sized, but the Ian Cochranes of the world, they're here. They do need this kind of content because otherwise the algorithm keeps choosing what's next for them to listen to as it autoplays while they're painting. So having longer form content that does follow a long form thread, but also to some degree gives in to, let's talk about this for a little while, let's talk about that, but then brings it back to the overarching thread. That kind of content matters for a certain kind of person. And that certain kind of person might just be the future in some interesting way. We don't know. My assumption is that that kind of person is going to have to work with a different kind of person, that we actually have to think about the different kinds of people that we now have and new ways of getting them to work across their class divides.
Yeah. And notice how this is engaging with what's going on. And it's not just assuming that everything works the way that it used to work 70 or 100 or 150 years ago. I wish that we had more people thinking about it the way that Dave is thinking about it. And you can come and think about it with us if you've got the time. And I do think, by the way, that this idea that the time that somebody's at work doesn't necessarily conflict with leisure time. It's a very interesting idea. And it's also an idea that I have seen a little bit of in the past. Gandhi, for instance, used to make the case that you could learn things by engaging in certain kinds of manual crafts, that certain kinds of manual crafts themselves would suggest to you certain things that could be useful. Now, I think that took it a little far, because it's not as if Gandhi was ensuring that the people doing these manual crafts were listening to or engaging with something really, really stellar. But he also had this idea that people should only do the manual crafts for maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. Then they should go spend the rest of the day doing other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Which is
and then
a lot more...
maybe the time that you spend doing that manual craft is the touch in the grass that makes the other stuff that you do better.
Is exactly the direction we have to be thinking. What necessary labor cannot be automated out of existence? How do we make that a part of our lives that doesn't kill us, or make it so that a handful of people, a significant portion of the population, ends up being reduced to nothing more than menial, mundane tasks? And also, what would that look like to the schooling system? How would the education system change if it just kind of presupposed, well, everybody does a little bit of society's chores, but it doesn't take over anybody's life, and you learn while you're there that there's all kinds of educational, entertaining things that you can get involved with, right? Well, these are like the kinds of opportunities and questions and conversations that we're privy to and that we're actively exploring. While everyone else is acting like it's business as usual, or we need to go back to business as usual. They're thinking Obama or whatever. But right now, we're over time, folks, and so we do have to cut this off. I don't want to. We've had like 150 live viewers this whole time. This is amazing. It's great to have you all here. Really appreciate you all. Benjamin, this is awesome. I'm looking forward to coming back and talking about this some more. There's a whole thing I want to talk about with micro time energy and energy time, which are two things that I never talk about. They're very under-theorized. And there's a whole thing I did with the seminar last Sunday, the wavelength one, where I brought in this quote from Heidegger. I talked about circumspective concern. I talked about when you're at rest, when you're not engaged with some work object, how your mind gets delivered over to alien interests, and I was tying this all into the smartphone and stuff like that. But the whole thing we're getting at about how there might be a way of actually getting into this other kind of headspace when you're at work, this is something Heidegger was not thinking about. He couldn't think about it. And some of my favorite Marx-informed or based theorists, I think they are a little bit more keen on it. So we'll have to come back and talk about that some more. This episode sets us up for a couple follow-up conversations, but the immediate one is a message to Democrats part 3. If this is a message to Democrats part 2, I want to do a message. We talked about this like earlier this week, Benjamin and I. A message to Democrats part 3 would be a follow-up on parts 1 and this one here. But we don't want to do that follow-up until some of our Democrats have reached out to us and told us, well, you guys didn't talk about this, though, and you didn't talk about that, and you need to talk about this, right? So basically, share this with Democrats in your life, folks, and let us know what they say. And let us know down in the comment section below, even if you're not a Democrat, what are some of the important things that we did not touch on that might be skewing the whole analysis? I saw somebody say that the two of us are very biased and we need to listen to other perspectives. Benjamin and I don't agree on a lot. I mean, we do agree on a lot, but we also come from different kinds of approaches and have our own perspectives. And we don't have to fight every time we're on stream. So just because we're not actively disagreeing doesn't mean we agree on everything, guys. For instance, some people were acting like we're all leftists here. I'm not a leftist here. So Why Left is not a leftist podcast. It is a conversation between somebody who is and somebody who's not. And so, yeah, there's going to be things that we care about, like timenergy and workers with earbuds and new forms of education, blah, blah, blah. But we're also still working through these things for ourselves. And everything we say is provisional in a sort of sense. And so if you have disagreements, or if you think that we're missing something, or if there's something I should have challenged Benjamin on, or vice versa, yeah, you should let us know down below.
Yeah, the whole point with Why Left is, should this thing that we're doing be a left-coded thing? Is it a left-wing thing in some historical, philosophical, or theoretical sense? And if so, in what sense? And my argument tends to be, it is, even if you don't need to code it that way necessarily. It is on some fundamental level, and it matters that we understand this. And Dave tends to not be so sure about that and to raise questions about it. And that's going to lead us to disagree sometimes about certain things. I think, probably very, very culturally moderate. And there are some social issues where Dave is pretty conservative, and probably I'm a little bit more culturally moderate than Dave. But that
I especially don't
talk through all that.
I especially don't like the gays. No, I'm just joking. I'm just kidding. I love gay people. Anyway, but you're right. Yeah, I do come out more conservative coded on some things. I absolutely do. Yeah.
Is that coding? Is that what Dave really thinks? That's part of what we talk about.
Yeah. 100%. All right, folks. We'll catch you on the flip side. Take care.
Bye-bye.
From Greek title.
Theory Underground exists to
Okay, there we go. Restarting this.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McKerracher, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.